Welcome to Global Undercurrents, the podcast that dives beneath the surface of international relations to explore the hidden connections shaping our world. I'm Mark Donovan.
And I'm Nadia Karim. Before we begin, a quick disclaimer. While Mark and I are fictional hosts with fictional backgrounds, the story we're about to share is based on verified research and sourced information. You can find all our sources in the show notes.
Today, we're pulling back the curtain on something that's been hiding in plain sight. A diplomatic contradiction that's got us scratching our heads.
We're calling this episode The Algerian Paradox, Secret Shipping Routes to Israel. And trust me, this one's a doozy.
So here's the bombshell. On April 20th, 2025, a cargo vessel sailed directly from Algeria's Bejaia port to Israel's Ashdod port. Now, why is this such a big deal?
Because Algeria has consistently positioned itself as one of the Arab world's most vocal opponents of normalization with Israel. They've walked out of UN meetings when Israeli representatives speak. They've pushed for Israel's expulsion from the African Union. They've been uncompromising, to say the least.
And yet, there's a ship sailing from Bejaia to Ashdod. It's like catching someone who's been loudly preaching veganism sneaking out for a midnight burger run.
That's actually not a bad analogy, Mark. Let me provide some context here. Algeria's support for Palestinian self-determination goes back decades. It's been a cornerstone of their foreign policy and a point of national pride.
Which makes what we found in the UN Comtrade database all the more surprising. Nadia, tell our listeners about those numbers.
The official trade data shows that in 2024, Israel imported goods worth $32.29 million from Algeria. That's not pocket change. And it's not a one-off either. This trade has been growing steadily for years.
And get this, Algeria now ranks as the fourth largest Arab exporter to Israel, behind the UAE, Jordan, and Egypt. The irony here is that Algeria has been viciously criticizing Morocco for normalizing relations with Israel since 2020.
While simultaneously increasing their own exports to Israel. In fact, while Morocco's exports to Israel have actually declined since normalization, Algeria's have been growing at an annualized rate of 64.1% over 5 years.
That's wild. So what exactly are they shipping from Bejaia to Ashdod? Gold? Oil? Secret diplomatic notes saying, "We hate you, but we need your money"?
Nothing quite so dramatic, Mark. The primary exports are hydrogen, inorganic chemicals, and precious metal compounds. Very specialized industrial products, not consumer goods.
Let's talk about these ports for a second. Bejaia is a major Algerian port in the Western Mediterranean. It's been experiencing some congestion lately, with ships sometimes waiting up to 14 days. But apparently, vessels headed to Israel don't seem to have trouble getting priority.
And Ashdod is one of Israel's critical maritime gateways. Nearly 99% of Israel's imports and exports move by sea, so these ports are literally lifelines for their economy.
What's fascinating is that we found a maritime industry report that confirms established shipping routes between these ports. This isn't new. It's been happening for years, just quietly.
Which brings us to the political implications. In February 2025, Algerian President Abdelmajid Tebboune made what some called an astonishing about-face by declaring that Algeria would consider normalizing ties with Israel if a fully independent Palestinian state is established.
Wait, so they're already trading but claiming they won't normalize until Palestine gets statehood? Isn't that like saying, "I won't date you until we're engaged"?
That's one way of looking at it, and it hasn't gone unnoticed within Algeria. When this shipping connection was revealed, critics called it a betrayal of Algeria's long-standing rhetoric and a clear case of hypocrisy.
You know what's really interesting about this timing? Algeria's influence in the Sahel region has been rapidly diminishing. They're having serious issues with Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. Meanwhile, their rival Morocco is actively exploiting these tensions.
And let's not forget that in April 2025, the United States implemented a 30% tariff increase on all Algerian imports. The diplomatic pressure is mounting from multiple directions. Algeria isn't alone in this kind of contradiction. Many Muslim-majority countries maintain significant trade with Israel despite political tensions. Turkey, for example, exported $5.7 billion to Israel in 2020, despite calling Israel a terrorist state.
It's almost like there are two parallel tracks operating simultaneously: the public political rhetoric and the private economic reality.
Exactly. And this pattern of economic pragmatism over ideology is becoming increasingly common across the region. As one analyst put it, to understand the true positions of states means to skip over the official rhetoric and examine the economic ties that politics often conceals.
This reminds me of our episode on the UAE's trade boom after the Abraham Accords. There's a real shift happening where economic interests are driving policy more than ideological positions.
The question is what this means for the Palestinian cause that Algeria claims to champion so strongly. If they're already trading with Israel while publicly opposing normalization, what leverage do they actually have?
And what does this mean for Algeria's standing in organizations like the Arab League, where they've positioned themselves as defenders of Palestinian rights?
Looking ahead, we see several possible scenarios. Algeria could continue its current dual-track approach, public opposition, but private engagement. They could gradually acknowledge their economic ties while maintaining political conditions for full normalization. Or, if progress is made toward Palestinian statehood, they could move toward formal normalization.
Or option 4, if public backlash to these revelations gets intense enough, they might actually scale back the trade to align their actions with their rhetoric.
Based on the patterns we're seeing, I think the dual-track approach is most likely to continue, with perhaps some gradual movement toward more open acknowledgement depending on regional developments.
So the big question here seems to be, when it comes to international relations, should we follow the rhetoric or follow the ships?
In this case, Mark, the ships are telling us much more than the speeches.